The course that I actually teach is diverse populations in physical activity and health. In a short term, that just basically means adapted physical activity. So I teach students how to adapt programs for people with disabilities. I absolutely love doing that. I love working with students. My father's been a professor at Western Kentucky University for 34 years, so I've grown up around that, and I just love the campus setting and working with students. I've also worked with people with disabilities since the age of 9, so any opportunity or chance that I get to teach somebody about disabilities, I just go for it. It's just a passion. I think the thing that's so positive about the class and that I enjoy so much is it's very hands-on. I can sit and tell you in a textbook that these two people have cerebral palsy. These are the needs they have, this is what they need. But it's not exactly that way, because two people with the same disability might not have the same needs. So by bringing people into the class or taking students out and letting them work hands-on with these people with disabilities, they learn exactly what their needs are. More importantly, they learn that they're people. It's not cerebral palsy, it's a person with cerebral palsy, and they learn that it's a person. A lot of textbooks will teach you and show you that people with Down syndrome are very loving and are very caring. And I've seen many incidences and actually experienced some where I've been punched by somebody, and that's not very loving. It might have been a love pet to them, but it wasn't to me. So that happens a lot of times. So being hands-on, getting out in the community is the big thing. I think one of the biggest rewards I've had in just the short time I've been teaching at U of L was when a student went out of town for a weekend. He came in and told me that he had gone to Chicago, and we talk a lot about facility accessibility. And he actually told me that he was at a restaurant and that he asked them where the access was for wheelchair users, and they politely showed him the back entrance that was a service elevator. And we had talked about that in class, and he came back and said, I was not happy with that. I met with their manager, I told them what they should be doing, and he said, I wouldn't have done that before if it wasn't for this class. So to me, that's really cool. I've done my job when somebody's actually out in public and looks for something that's not accessible, and that's really neat.
Okay, there are courses that are taught where students don't have expectations. They're not aware of their expectations, what the professor expects from them. One of the things that the biggest complaint about students is that I'm a very rigid individual when it comes to examinations, and I think examinations are part of the learning process. When a student takes an examination and they don't know the answer to the question, I review the examinations next course period, and we discuss what was wrong with their answers, why their answers were incorrect, and it's part of the learning process. You know, I'm talking about world archaeology, I'm talking about archaeology and forensic cases. In my forensics courses, I bring to them real examples. I've done jobs for the FBI and the Kentucky State Police and LPD and stuff like that, and I actually, once the case has been cleared and I can get permission from the law enforcement, I can use the case as an example in my classroom. And I think that's one of the things that the students like is, yeah, they watch CSI, or they watch the Discovery Channel and they see things in Germany and Europe and Egypt and that sort of stuff. But when there's Kentucky and Virginia, or Virginia and Kentucky, or archaeology in Kentucky, Virginia, then they really can appreciate it and they can see that things really go on here. Whether it's some of the forensics cases I work on, or whether it's some of the archaeological projects I've worked on, and they can relate to it.
Well, I guess to engage students, first thing I try to do is engage them on a personal level. I've got a lot more in common with my students than I don't have in common with my students. It wasn't too long ago that I was there, so I can relate to them on that level. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I've got a life outside of school, just like all of them do. So I try real hard to get to know them on a personal level early on in the semester through informal conversations. Email, of course, makes that a lot easier to do than it at one time was. In the class, as far as my first rule of how to engage them is don't make them listen to me for too long, which seems to be has been a pretty good strategy so far. Try to break my classes up They're about 2.5 hours. I try to make sure we're not doing anything for more than 30 minutes, and every classroom, every class session has some lecture, but more importantly, there's some interactive things, maybe some small group work, get them to do some writing, put the delivery of content to the extent possible in their hands. We're a master's program, so there's in every class that I teach, there's people with knowledge and expertise that's related to what we're teaching that exceeds mine, so I just try to honor that and make sure that they have a chance to do the teaching of the class. Frequently in my feedback in classes is that students really like that. They like that you honor what they bring in, the knowledge and expertise that they bring into the classroom.
I love to teach. It's a passion that I have, and I hope that enthusiasm is transmitted to the students. Some of the things that I do to help engage our students is I very much believe in the Socratic method of questioning as opposed to giving information. If you're in one of my classes, there's not going to be a lot of content given to you that you have to take notes on, but what there will be a lot of questions, predominantly through a case study format, to help you critically think about the information, to help you begin to problem solve, to make decisions about various client situations that you may encounter. For example, when we're working with information about hypoxia, the students won't be given a list of early and late signs of hypoxia, but they'll be given a mixture of symptoms, and they'll have to pick out which are the early symptoms, which are the late symptoms, and then they'll have to explain to me why the symptoms are early, why the symptoms are late, and then having case studies to say, if the client presents this way, what is going on? Early hypoxia, late hypoxia, asking the students questions. How do you know if the client's getting better? How do you know if the client's getting worse? How do you know that you're being effective with the care that you're providing? So really wanting them to think with each piece of information so they can really assimilate the information into their way of practice. Some of the specific things I do in class besides the questioning is I love to use the creative teaching strategies. I have games developed for almost all of my classes, so at times we'll be playing Jeopardy, at times we'll be playing Hollywood Squares, at times we'll be playing Win, Lose, or Draw, but just to change up the pace of the class, to give the students a little bit of variety, but again, to have them thinking about the information in a way other than just trying to look at the content and try and memorize the content.
I hate to reduce it down to a series of things, but I guess I always try to think of 4 or 5 things whenever I'm approaching teaching or the idea of teaching. And I think the first and most important thing is that you have to want to be there. There's nothing students can smell out faster than a fake, a fraud, someone who doesn't want to be in the classroom, who doesn't have any interest in teaching. It's almost like they say dogs can smell fear. Well, students can smell a fake. So you have to kind of really be excited about being there and want to do the job. That being said, that's probably almost as important as knowing something about what you're going to teach. You probably ought to have some knowledge about the topic which you're going to teach. So there is some backfill you have to do. You have to have some expertise and some understanding of the topic which you're going to cover. And the more of that, the better. So I guess the first 2 things are wanting to be there and having a knowledge base to do it. Third, I think you have to be fair to students. You can't play favorites. You can't teach the best and forget the rest, because let's face it, the best don't need you. It's the bottom tail of distribution that really need you. You need to reach out to them and pull them along. They're the ones who can get left behind. I guess I would also say that you have to set some expectations for everybody in the class, and those expectations have to be a little higher than what many students might think they should be. I think you have to set the bar kind of high to make students strive for that, and I think sometimes we can expect too little, and you create a self-fulfilling prophecy where people don't meet the expectations, or where you create a self-fulfilling prophecy where people do meet the expectations that you set for them and they're too low. I guess I also I kind of bounce back and forth between being strict and being loose in the class. I think that I kind of have to run the ship. It's my ship and I'm the captain, but at the same time, I like for my students to have a role in kind of where we go and how we get there. So teaching is not a democracy, but it's not always a dictatorship either.
The approach to teaching, just in general, is I try seriously to make it interesting, because general chemistry for most students is a horrible experience. I have a niece that just started college this semester, and she flat out told me her chemistry class sucks. And this is an all too often, I don't know if you can say that, but this is an all too often experience with many students. And we are trying to do it differently, and my point is to try to make it as interesting as possible. So there's various aspects involved. We do a lot of demonstrations in the class. I try to tie into things in the student would naturally experience. So it's not just the super nerdy stuff that we try to make applications for also. And that's it's just trying to make it interesting. It's just trying to make it interesting. And it's a tough subject to make interesting. And a lot of students aren't there because they want to be. It's a required class for their major. And I'm very pleased that many of them end the class and find it was worthwhile taking, was enjoyable taking.
If you get a perfect score, this too can be yours.
Often I teach very large classes, upwards to 350 students at one time. Most of these students are new freshmen, incoming freshmen. They're coming from a high school environment where there are 25 to 30 students in a class maximum, and now they're in my class, their first semester in college, and there are 349 other people there with them. I'm sure that causes them to feel disconnected, alienated, and completely out of the loop. So my first, I think, approach, or my first job is to make the student know that I'm connected with that student. It's difficult and very demanding to connect to 350 individuals in one setting, but that's what I try to do, to connect with the students. Because if they're connected with me, they're going to follow what I'm saying. They're going to understand what I'm saying. They're not just going to sit there and me go yada, 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 pushing it out. They're actually going to absorb what it is that I have to say if I connect with them. And that's what I try to do, to connect with my students.
He studied, he came.
I think the main thing that I do is that I let them know that I care about them, and I care what happens to them. And the classroom does not stop in the classroom. I'm always there. I try to be there to talk to them, to help them. I try to get them to understand that their grade is not nearly as important as they think it is. And so I try to get them to enjoy the process of learning. And we talk a lot about how you're socialized into believing that homework is bad. We don't talk about home learning opportunities, we talk about homework. And so we try to change that whole paradigm that they've grown up with. And I tell them that if you want to make a real good grade, the best way to do that is to come in here and spend an hour and a half caring about understanding the topic, not being worried about getting through the class in the next hour and a half or so. I guess another thing that I do is that it's important to me to respect the students. And I like for them to respect me, and the only way that's going to happen is if I respect them. And so in my classes, they will never, ever, I hope, see me respond to a question sarcastically or in a demeaning way. And in my classes, I try to get them to understand that there's such thing as a bad question. And so I encourage them, even in the big classes, to be part of it. And so I think that's part of what happens, the fact that I do care about them. And I think that they know that I care about them. And that changes the whole dynamic between the faculty and and the student.
My approach to teaching is that the most important thing for me to do is inspire an interest in the subject, which in my case is archaeology. That feeds into giving a clear presentation of the facts because that's what makes the subject interesting. But if the students go away without having been inspired with a feeling this is something I want to understand and make a part of my life, then I've really failed. And it doesn't matter how well they do on the tests or how much information they manage to front load to spill back on a multiple choice exam, I still haven't really succeeded if they don't leave feeling that this is a subject that they understand, that they've mastered, that they are literate in, and that they want to know more about and keep up with all of their lives long, because I'm certainly teaching a subject that very few of my students will pursue as a career. Nonetheless, I think it is something that really awakens one to all sorts of things in life and in the world around us, and is a very important component of civilization to understand archaeology and looking at the human world through the things it creates rather than what it says about itself, which is history. So I try to engage the students as much as I can in the field. I bring my own research into it as much as possible with visual presentations of sites where I've dug or underwater discoveries where I've been part of the team that went down. I bring as many artifacts as I can to class so that they've got a tactile contact with this past, whether it's a 5,000-year-old granite axe from here in the Ohio Valley or the pottery bowl of a Roman legionnaire from 2,000 years ago, just so it's real to them, just so that they've got something in their hands that they feel they've handled that is a part of the learning experience.
I think that college teaching is the best job in the world. And I think people who don't appreciate that are stupid. And you're dealing with people who have a lot of curiosity, and your job should be to A, satisfy some of the curiosity, and B, to motivate them. And the way I mean, there are lots of different, and there are two different styles you can motivate people. You can motivate them by fear, or you can motivate them by engagement. I'd like to think that's kind of how I traditionally do it. I grade everything cumulatively, so there's no great big one, no exam, final exam type stuff. It takes some of the sting out of it, and you have to keep moving forward. You can't cram when you're doing that because you've got lots of things you're doing while you're doing it. The other thing is, if you can't have a good time while you're doing it, you shouldn't even be in the game. If I don't laugh at least once every class from something a student does, then I've failed, and they've failed. You ought to be able to have a good time with your students. In a class of under 35, you should know everybody's name. In a class of 100 or so, you should know everybody by sight. You should always be you should be able to, it means a lot to students just to say, hey, how you doing? Even if you don't know their name, that kind of stuff. This aloofness and division stuff, I think is a real bad thing.